Welcome to the Savvy Commercial Real Estate Podcast, your resource for relevant, helpful, and immediately usable information regarding all things commercial real estate. Whether you are buying, selling, financing, exchanging, managing, or developing commercial real estate, rest assured you are in the right place. Savvy Commercial. Listen, apply, repeat.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining the Savvy Commercial Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Sherman, coming to you from beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. Today, we have as our guest Aaron Stratman, Vice President of Cost Segregation Services in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Cost Segregation Services, which I may also refer to as CSSI, although they're based in Baton Rouge, they've done studies in all 50 states. They've been in business for 20 years and have successfully delivered over 30,000 engineering-based cost segregation studies to their clients, while also partnering with certified public accountants, or CPAs. My guest today is Aaron Stratman, as I said, Vice President. Aaron has 10-plus years of sales experience under his belt, both with private companies and Fortune 500 companies. He is adept at making complex content easy to understand and digest, which is really going to come in handy today with this topic. Aaron consults with clients all over the country to apply his knowledge of tax law, also with his team at CSSI, who has unparalleled experience standing behind him. He graduated from Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, with a Bachelor's of Science in Public Affairs. In his spare time, Aaron enjoys being outdoors, fishing, biking, traveling when possible with his wife and 3 children, and cheering on his beloved Indiana Hoosiers basketball team. Yes, Bob Knight is still beloved in the Hoosier State. Good morning, Aaron. How are you today?
Hey, good morning, Neil. I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
My
we
pleasure.
Are woke up in Baton Rouge today in the 30s, so
wow.
not as swampy as normal.
Well, I'm not going to brag or anything. It is probably going to be 80-something today, but give it time. We'll probably get down to the 40s or something. Aaron, before we jump into this topic a bit deeper, I'm guessing many of our listeners have either never heard of cost segregation, or perhaps they have but don't really understand how it works. So can you take a couple of minutes and give us the kind of 30,000-foot view, so to speak? What is cost segregation exactly?
Yeah, sure. And again, thanks for having me on, and always a pleasure to talk with you. Regarding this podcast also, I've heard some rumblings around the world that this may be on the cusp of upsetting Joe Rogan's #1 spot.
We'll see.
Yeah, I'm just excited to help you get there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We'll see over the next couple of years.
So it's kind of funny. Although cost segregation has been an approved method to depreciate a building for 20 plus years, it's probably more popular than ever in 2022. Part of that is due to the short-term rental market just blowing up all over the country, Airbnbs and VRBOs. But cost segregation simply is a way to accelerate depreciation. So there are 5, 7, 15-year, 27.5-year, or 39-year property. Most people lump everything together in 27.5-year or 39-year property. 27.5 if it's residential or a hotel. 39-year if it's commercial property or anything else. So you would just depreciate, a $1 million building equally over that time period. We come in, accelerate the property in the 5-year, which is interior improvements. So that's anything from cabinetry, lighting, flooring, specialty electrical. 15-year is anything exterior. It could be hardscapes, landscapes, garage doors, security systems. There's a wide array of things that we can accelerate in those categories. And so savvy commercial building owners, no pun intended, choose to get this done because A, they have a tax liability they would like to offset or a lot of times completely wipe out with the accelerated depreciation that we can create. And they also understand the time value of money. So let's say I can increase my cash flow today by $100,000. I'd be better off than letting the government hold that for 39 years. So something I like to say is, if you had the opportunity or the luxury, I guess, of winning the lottery, and you won $500 million from the Mega Millions, would you rather take the lump sum or get the annuity over time? Most people are probably going to choose the lump sum because they know that they can invest that, make that money grow, and they'll be better off long term. Does that make sense?
Actually, my wife and I have that discussion quite regularly when she buys her lottery tickets. So that's a great analogy. So I'm listening to this part about depreciation. Are they taking all of this depreciation, in the first year or early years? And if the answer to that is yes, what happens to their depreciation going forward? Does that change at all?
Yeah, great question. So, as a firm that focuses on this small piece of the tax law, there are a lot of the same questions that arise again and again, and this is one of those. So let's just say you have $1 million building, and we find $200,000 in depreciation that you could take in 2022, and you can utilize all of that. So that $200,000 is now gone. But you still have $800,000 because we cannot accelerate the structural components of the building. So whether you're depreciating that over 27 and a half years or 39 years, you still have the majority of the depreciation to use on a yearly basis. So that's kind of a misconception. Sometimes people think if I do this now, I'm not going to have anything going forward. The other thing to point out is if you can't utilize, in my example, the $200,000 in depreciation for 2022, that remaining amount would just be rolled forward into future years, so it wouldn't be lost. And I will point out, some people do think that by doing a cost segregation study that we're actually creating more depreciation than if they just stuck with what's called straight line. In the end, those amounts are going to be exactly the same, but hopefully, the building owner who took this depreciation up front was wise, and with this increase in cash flow, and they made a lot more in the end down the road by investing this money, making improvements to their buildings, which may be even allowed to charge more rent, et cetera. So again, it really comes back to the time value of money, and then what that owner chooses to do with that.
Okay. Now, maybe you already answered this, and I missed it, but I'm still just a little bit curious. How much of the cost segregation can be applied to what's already there in the building the day the investor buys it? Day one, they buy the property as is, where is, versus ongoing benefits that they might get from, adding improvements, making upgrades, improvements, and so on, whether that be, a roof, HVAC, parking lot, paint, whatever, things that they do post-closing versus what's physically in the building when they buy it day one. Is there a difference? Is it treated differently?
Yes. So as soon as someone acquires a commercial or residential investment property, and that building is considered in service, so that generally means when a business receives their certificate of occupancy, or when they start collecting rent. So completing a cost segregation study earlier on in the ownership is advised, especially if you have income to offset with the increased depreciation created by our study. One misconception is that's still out there by some is that you can only do a study for the first year you own a property, and then the opportunity is lost, which is simply not true. We do a ton of cost segregation studies on buildings that someone has owned for years. The thing to look at is how much depreciation is left on the original building basis. And to answer your second question, have there been improvements made? So you could have owned a building for 25 years, and at this point, there's not much meat on the bone. But let's say you put a $500,000 improvement in last year. You did a whole new room on a building or something. You could take that. You could take advantage of cost segregation on the remaining basis plus the improvements. So, the answer is yes to both of those. Take advantage early on if there is a tax liability, and then don't forget about those improvements down the road.
Okay, got it. Okay, now what about when the owner of the building makes improvements to the property, whether they're tenant improvements for a new tenant, say an office building or a shopping center, or ongoing renovations and upgrades to an apartment complex, for an example, not necessarily TIs, but renovations, upgrades, etc. Or do the expenditures need to be more in line with what I would call non-recurring capital expenditures? Big ticket items like roofs, HVAC, major plumbing. Didn't I read somewhere online that this can be done with, I hate to use the word, less expensive improvements?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the owner of the building is paying for the TIs of a tenant, they would be the ones who could take advantage of the tax benefit. It depends on what's being done, but if it's just a couple of things that are pretty straightforward, the owner's CPA may very well be able to either expense or capitalize this on their own. If there's quote unquote substantial improvements, then a firm like ours or another reputable cost segregation firm could either do a cost segregation study on those improvements or help the CPA on what they should do. And then, depending on the non-reoccurring capital expenditures like a roof, HVAC system, plumbing, et cetera, you may be able to either expense or capitalize. And this could easily be another podcast topic, but determining what to do with these expenditures fall under what's called the RABI rules, RABI, sorry. And this originated from the Tangible Property Regulations, and that stands for Restoration, Adaptation, Betterment, and Improvement. And that gets into the weeds, but those are things that it would have to follow those rules in order to determine how they're classified on the owner's depreciation schedule.
Okay. Aaron, let's just take a half a minute here for you to tell our listeners how they can get a hold of you should they have any questions regarding cost segregation, or they have a question for you specifically. Can you give us either an email address, a website, a phone number, or any of the above, all of the above?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can call me directly. My number is 225-229-6468. So my email address is my last name, Stratman, Stratman, first initial A. So it looks like Stratmana, at cost, COST, seg, SEG, serve, SERV, without the E.com. So Stratmana at costsegserve.com. And our company's website is csssistudy.com.
CSSI Study, STUDY.com.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. Aaron, another question. If you addressed this already, then I must have missed it. I'm taking some notes here, but interior improvements versus exterior improvements, are they treated any differently, or is it expense and expense? Painting the outside of the building or putting in a parking lot versus, major improvements or even not so major improvements inside the building. Mm-hmm. Does the IRS distinguish between interior and exterior, or is it's your building, dollars spent or dollars spent?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I think the first question you had asked, they are treated differently, and that's because of the 5 and 15-year property. So interior improvements are categorized as 5-year, and then the exterior improvements are 15-year.
Okay, you did mention
the thing that
earlier.
really makes them the same, though, is bonus depreciation, with that being in play. So as we talk today in 2022, you can receive 100% bonus depreciation for 5-year or 15-year, which is great, and why a lot of people are still acquiring properties to take advantage of bonus depreciation. But yeah, because of that, they're treated the same, meaning that any item that is put into the 5 and 15-year bucket could be depreciated in year 1. So that's huge.
Got it. And Aaron, since you brought up bonus depreciation, I've read a bit about that. There's been some buzz about 100% bonus depreciation going bye-bye, so to speak. What do our listeners need to know about that?
Yeah, so I'll just note too, even before bonus depreciation and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made it 100% bonus, we were in business doing cost segregation studies for people accelerating the 5 and 15-year property, even without it. So there was and there still will be an advantage to doing these studies going forward. However, yeah, with the bonus depreciation being stepped down starting in 2023, it's almost a daily topic with clients who are inquiring about a cost segregation study and what does this mean for them. So I have heard some conflicting things about how this will be treated, but the correct answer is that if you acquired a building between September 27th, 2017 and before January 1st, 2023, you can still receive 100% bonus depreciation on your building, which again means if we find $100,000 for you, Neil, and you can utilize all of that today in the current tax year, you can take all of it. And so full bonus depreciation is being phased down by 20% each year for the properties placed in service after December 31st, 2022 and before January 1st, 2027. So this means that if you acquired a property in 2019, though, but didn't do a cost segregation study until 2024, you would still get 100% bonus depreciation. So we've had a lot of conversations as well with clients who are aware of this phase out and are trying to still acquire additional properties in 2022 to take advantage of that 100% bonus depreciation.
Okay.
Does that help, or did I make it more confusing?
No, that does help. That does help. I guess I'd like to ask you about. So we've talked a lot about upgrades, improvements, replacements, newer things, but those things are replacing older things. To simplify it, you're putting in new carpet, you got to pull out the old carpet. You're putting down new floor coverings, you got to pull out old floor coverings. New fixtures replace old fixtures. New HVAC, for example, replaces old HVAC. What about the stuff that's being pulled out that's going to be tossed? Are there any financial benefits to that? Does an owner of a building get any write-downs, write-offs, tax benefits, et cetera, for the stuff that's going in the dumpster?
Yeah. So what you're referring to is called partial asset disposition, or PAD. So a partial asset disposition allows the building owner to write down the remaining amount of those items during a renovation or a remodel. So like the carpet example, if you tear out that carpet after 5 years of ownership, there's still value left in that carpet, or at least the IRS says there's value. So you can actually, instead of just throwing it in the dumpster and having it hauled off, there's a tax benefit there, and that's something that we can help calculate. That not only includes the write-off of the remaining basis of that carpet, but also includes the cost for the removal and disposal of those items. So something important to know for a commercial property owner, they have to do it the same year the renovation takes place. So it is a use it or lose it opportunity, unlike cost segregation. And failure to write down the remaining basis in the tax year the renovation was performed permanently negates the opportunity. So it is something to keep in mind, for building owners who are doing improvements and renovations, so you don't lose that opportunity.
Sure.
And a pad will also yield permanent tax savings at the time of sale by reducing the building basis. And you really have to have an engineering-based cost study done that will provide accurate calculations to apply the disposition to your tax return. And taxpayers they're highly encouraged to make an annual election to take these additional write-offs as they improve the tangible property of their building. Okay,
understood. Aaron, before we did this episode, I went online, did a little research on my own, which is probably a little dangerous, a little confusing, but I did see the letters in caps. QIP. I saw that, more than once, several times anyway. What does QIP stand for, and what does it mean for what you do for your business?
Yeah, so QIP is Qualified Improvement Property, and it's an improvement made by the taxpayer to an interior portion of a commercial building, or could be a hotel as well, just non-residential. Doesn't apply to your own residence. And this is something that if the improvement is placed in service after the building was first placed in service, you could get QIP. And what that means is being able to expense that in the year that it's done. So cannot be structural at all. The IRS makes a point to say any building enlargements, structural framework, elevators, escalators, doesn't apply. But anything interior, so we'll get into this in a little bit, but let's say you're replacing your lighting. You have all old fixtures in there, want to upgrade to LED for a number of reasons. You could get QIP for that. And the benefit is, just like bonus depreciation, you could take that deduction because you're improving the building in the same year you did it. So a huge advantage for people. And this was corrected a couple of years ago when the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act came out. It was classified under 15-year property. Since then, they've corrected it, and now you can take advantage of QIP in the same year that you do those improvements.
Okay, good, very nice. Aaron, what about, we've been talking, or at least I have anyway, have been talking mostly about investors buying properties, whether it's a multi-tenant office building, shopping center. You've talked about hotels, apartments, and so on. Let's sort of shift gears just a little bit and talk about the thousands upon thousands of buildings owned by what I would call users who, in most cases are single tenant buildings, and they operate their business there. Anywhere from a machine shop to somebody who does screen printing to somebody who owns a warehouse that they run a business in, what have you. I'm thinking more in terms of business owners. The list goes on and on and on. What about somebody like that? Is this limited to investors who buy income-producing properties where they're sort of passive investors? Or would this also work for somebody who buys, a mechanic? Let's just take somebody who's in the automotive service industry and they buy a building to a body shop. I'm just going to pick that as an example. Does that person also have the ability to take advantage of cost segregation or not?
Yeah, so I'll kind of answer that in two parts. So the first part would be, there could be some differences, and but they could still take advantage of cost segregation. So, giving your example of the body shop, if that person, let's say they have a W-2 job and they're not a real estate professional, they would only be able to offset their passive income from the investment property. Whereas if someone bought a building and they operate their business out of it, they could offset their business income from the building. They would just want to make sure their CPA makes what's called the grouping election, and that's an election their CPA would make in the first year, so they're able to do this. Again, we're not CPAs, so we always advise the client to get with their trusted tax professional to assist in those decisions. But yeah, if somebody is operating their business out of the building they own, they should definitely take advantage of this, and the implications could be huge. The other piece of the answer I wanted to give is that the savings is relative on a cost segregation study. So I had talked about earlier the short-term rental market blowing up, and there are a lot of smaller properties, a lot of people just getting into this whole world of investing and into real estate. And so we do a ton of $150,000, $200,000 residential rentals. And for a lot of people, maybe who do this full time and have a massive real estate portfolio, they wouldn't even think about doing a cost segregation study on a $200,000 building. But for a lot of people, if they could take a $30,000 write-off in a tax year, that could mean the world to them. So I just always want to point out that you don't have to have $1 million building to do this. The savings may not be great enough for you to go forward with it, but surely explore it and let us run the numbers for you, and then make a business decision based on the numbers we come back with.
Thank you, Aaron. Again, if you're listening to us today, this is the Savvy Commercial Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Sherman. My guest today is Aaron Stratman with Cost Segregation Services. And Aaron was kind enough to give us some contact information. If anyone listening has a question for him, you can reach him directly at 225-229-6468. You can drop him an email at Stratman, that's STRATMANA, at costsegserv, SERV, no E.com, COSTSEGSERV.com. And you can check out the Cost Segregation Services website at CSSI Study, with a Y, study, STUDY.com. Aaron, welcome back. I have a question for you about when the owner sells the building. So an owner who has owned it, maybe they did a cost segregation, not just a study, but they took advantage of some of the benefits that your study brought to light, and then they sell the building. Mm-hmm. A year or two after the cost segregation study or the cost segregation benefits are taken, they sell the building. Now, the IRS knows that this was done on the building, but similar to any other building that sells, the new owner starts his depreciation of the building over, even if the seller was, 15 years into a 39-year depreciation schedule or, a 27.5-year schedule. They just start over. What about with cost segregation? Does it work the same way? Can the buyer of the property start over, or have the benefits been, once the benefits have been taken on a particular building, they're taken? Or they're used up?
So fantastic question again. So the new buyer can complete a cost segregation study, whether the previous owner did it or not, which is great. In a different vein, utilizing this as part of a estate planning strategy, it could be extremely powerful. So let's say you have children and plan to pass down your properties once you pass away. The children could not only complete a new cost segregation study on that same building, but you're able to do so with a step up in basis. So although I don't like to talk to my clients about them passing away, I do like to point out that if they are planning to pass down their buildings in the future, it could really help their those children or the heirs out.
I hear you, Aaron, talking a lot about things like, I know you're not a CPA, and I know you're not giving anybody tax advice, but I hear you referring to things like step up in basis and depreciation and so on. How much emphasis do you put on your clients talking to their CPAs and getting tax advice? Or is it not always needed and recommended, or do you think it's always needed and recommended in every situation that involves cost segregation?
Yeah, so CPAs are critical to this equation. They're going to be the ones who, in the end, are applying our work. So we're going to give anywhere from a 30 to 70 page final report, just packed with tax law and information on what we found in their building. And so the CPA is going to get this report and apply our work to their tax return. So while they're critically important, they're wonderful partners of ours. We ultimately, though, want the building owner to make the best business decision for them. So, some CPAs, they understand this really well. They advocate it for their clients who have a tax liability. But at the same time, there are still those misconceptions out there. And, I want to be able to arm the building owner with enough information and with a free predictive analysis estimate on their property to then take back to their CPA and say, hey, CSSI just ran a report on my buildings. They came back with, they say that in 2022, I could take an additional $750,000. Why wouldn't I do this? And ultimately that they should make the decision, I think, with the counsel of their CPA. And we don't fault CPAs either for not, because that's another thing we get. Why didn't my CPA tell me this? I've owned, buildings for 10 years and I could have been taking advantage of this. Now, CPAs have to know a ton about the tax law. I mean, we're in this small little niche, and our focus is on commercial buildings and the ways that you can legally reduce tax liability and increase cash flow. So we want to be a partner to the building owner CPA and just give the enough knowledge to the building owner to make a business decision.
Understood. Aaron, we're coming to the end of our time together. We have time, though, for a few more questions. And I want to pivot just a little bit, going back to some of my research before our call. I was reading about energy savings. Without getting into too much about what I was reading, I'd rather just ask you, does CSSI deal with energy savings for the building owners? And if so, how do you do that? How does that work, et cetera? What sort of energy savings are we talking about?
Yeah, so we have a sister company, and it is called CSSI Energy Services. And if you want to check it out, it's CSSIEnergyServices.com. But it's focused on LED lighting upgrades and new installation. And there are some specific tax pieces that apply to lighting projects. One being partial asset disposition if you're going in and retrofitting a property, and that's what we talked about earlier. You can take a write down on those old fixtures you're removing. And then there's bonus depreciation on the new fixtures going in. And so we're able to, at times, do lighting projects for customers and create a large enough tax deduction to pay for the project. And so it doesn't just apply to lighting. It could be security systems. It could be, let's say it's a self-storage facility and you're replacing all new doors. Those specific tax pieces apply. And so it's really unique. And when you can upgrade a building with lighting or other improvements, and in a year's time take, sometimes, like I said, a larger tax deduction than the project cost, I mean, it can be a game changer. And so I would just encourage everyone to think a little bit differently when you're doing upgrades and improvements, so you don't miss out on those opportunities. And a lot of times, what's really cool is if somebody has not done a cost segregation study, you pair a cost segregation study with those other tax benefits for those improvements. I mean, it's a home run. I was just talking with a client yesterday, and lighting project was somewhere around $50,000, but with all the tax deductions, he was plus $149,000 that he gets to take off his taxes next year. So pretty cool stuff.
So if I understand that correctly, Aaron, I'm following you, I believe, and I hope everyone else is. The energy savings or the projects that you're recommending are not only saving them money on their utility bills on an ongoing basis. Mm-hmm. So at some point there's going to be a crossover, and they're going to recapture whatever the cost was of that analysis or that study.
Yeah.
But then they're also getting tax benefits that they otherwise wouldn't. So it's a, I don't know what you call that, a double whammy, not a double whammy, the opposite of a double benefit, double bonus, savings, immediate savings and ongoing savings that'll pay, more than pay for the cost of the report, but also pretty substantial or potentially substantial tax benefits that they otherwise would not have gotten had they not made those improvements.
Exactly. It's and
that
kind of a shameless plug. I mean, we're the only company, since we're not a normal electrical contractor. We're the only company that I'm aware of who is combining lighting projects with tax analysis.
Well, shameless plugs are fine on this show, so thank you for that. So Aaron, we're coming to the end of our show. I'm going to ask you maybe a two-part question, if you don't mind, and hope I'm not catching you off guard here, and kind of goes along with the shameless plug. So the first part is this. I own a building, a $10 million office building or a $5 million office building. I'm just going to pick a building. And, you're in Baton Rouge. The company's based in Baton Rouge, but you've done these studies all over the United States. The building's in, Denver, Colorado. So are either you or your colleagues or one of your colleagues going to get on a plane, go to Denver, inspect or visit, walk the property as part of your report? Or are you relying more on things like, a rent roll, maybe leases, financial statements, maybe some sort of a report or analysis on what I've spent on TIs or improvements? So again, is it all being done from Louisiana, or do you need to go to the property wherever it is? And you said you did reports in 50 states. Did you visit those properties?
Yes. So super important to point out, and I'm glad you asked that. We do an engineering-based study, and so there are several approved ways that the IRS says that you can get a cost segregation study done. but they're all not equal. And so what we do is really considered the gold standard. And so we have to come out to every property. We have people all over the country who work with CSSI, and so they'll do the studies and the building audit, I should say. Yeah, so they'll come out, do the walkthrough of the property, take notes, take pictures. I kind of say the hard part and the part that takes a little bit of time is that we have construction engineers back at the home office in Baton Rouge, and those construction engineers will then take the information from the site survey and start breaking everything down into those 5 and 15-year buckets, and they'll put values to those items. And so that's critically important and provides a ton of documentation for the client and their CPA. And just something else that we do and people who are listening should be aware of is when considering which firm to do the cost segregation study, I wouldn't recommend using a fly-by-night a company for that. You want to for your own health, you choose a good doctor, right? And for this, you want to choose a good cost segregation firm. We would represent our clients at no additional cost if they were ever audited.
That's great.
Which is unlikely, but who knows with the 87,000 more agents that it's been thrown around. So there are critical differences between firms who do these studies, and you want to choose a good firm. They're all not equal.
Understood. I did tell you that was a two-part question. So part B, let's say, is and if you can't do this, if it's too kind of out there, then that's okay. But can you give some sort of a ballpark price for what a cost segregation study will cost the building owner? And I'm assuming it's tied some way, directly or indirectly, to the size of the building or the value of the building, or maybe how many moving parts there might be. I'm not even sure if you can pin that down, but that's why a range is even fine. Is this something that costs hundreds of dollars,
Sure.
tens of thousands of dollars, somewhere in between, or is it just all over the board?
Yeah, so we will always do a no-cost analysis. I always tell everybody, let us first just run the numbers. There's no harm in giving some basic information or your depreciation schedule to one of our analysts. They're going to come back with the estimated tax savings for you, and then our fixed fee to get that done, which is also tax deductible. It ranges from a couple thousand on a smaller property, all the way up to well over $10,000. I kind of explain it as if you had a warehouse, same square footage as a medical facility. The warehouse might have 80% warehouse space, 20% office. The medical facility is going to have all kinds of equipment, specialty, electrical. The finishes are going to be generally much higher and worth more. So that's going to take more time and effort from our engineers than the warehouse. So that's where you'll see the fees really fluctuate. And of course, if someone is doing multiple properties as well, we always factor that in and try to give the most economical cost and hopefully over deliver on our results.
And Aaron, I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. Whether they take advantage of the recommendations in the study or not, the cost of the study is tax deductible. I'm assuming in the year that they spent the money. Correct.
Yep.
Okay.
You're exactly right.
Well, gosh, I mean, that's, again, I hate to say a no-brainer, but that certainly softens the blow a bit. Anyway, Aaron, I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time today. We've come to the end of our show. You've been listening to Savvy
Thank
Commercial Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Neil Sherman. You can always check us out on savvycommercial.com. If you have any questions, either for our guest or about anything else, or if you want to ask an expert, and you'll see that section on our website, you can send an email to info@savvycommercial.com. Our guest has been Aaron Stratman with Cost Segregation Services. You can reach Aaron at 225-229-6468 or drop him an email at stratmana, so last name, first initial, at costsegserv.com. Their website is cssistudy.com. And Aaron did talk about their sister company that handles the LED lighting projects, energy savings, and so on. And you can check out that website at cssisenergyservices.com. Aaron, again, thank you for joining us today and being our guest on the Savvy Commercial Real Estate Podcast. Have a great day and great rest of your week.
you. Appreciate it, and hope it was very helpful.
Very helpful. Great stuff. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.